Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. Welcome back to another installment of Jamel on Tudor. So today we're broadcasting from Greens Lake Reserve, which for those of you that have a good memory is where we were first camping out in Nigel Arnova. It's been 105 days since we were last here, and a lot's happened since. You can follow our journey so far on Instagram and through some of our other videos that we posted on YouTube. As we're preparing for a quick service and to fix up a few things on Nigel, we're heading into Shepparton tomorrow, so we thought it would be a good time to go through a few of the true costs of full-time caravan living, as well as some key and costly lessons that we wish we'd known when we were standing here, just about 105 days ago. In summary, we built up enough courage to look at our bank statements. So let's break down the costs. So we had a budget in place to cover off fixed costs and estimates for what it would be living full time in the caravan and traveling around the country, and basically what we were hoping to spend and save in turn. So first up, let's talk about fuel. We'd budgeted $200 a week, thereabouts, which got absolutely blown out of the water when we hoonded up to the Northern Territory with our old convoy. All told, to date we've spent just about $4,000 on fuel alone, and $2,000 of which was solely throughout May, which was the period where we were driving up through South Australia, up to the Territory and back through the Flinders. So we were sort of expecting that was going to be the most expensive run for us, we were having to cover 6 hours a day just to get to our next stop. Groceries, we budgeted $100 a week. Doesn't sound like much, but we took a look at what we were spending when we were living at home and thought, that would be somewhat of a reasonable guesstimate. Despite our best attempts, however, the cost of living crisis hit us hardest here. We ended up spending a touch under $3,000 on groceries, which was just under double what we had budgeted there. Alcohol, I'm quite pleased to report that we only spent a grand total of $985 at the bottle store. That may, however, be the reason behind the other cost line item, which was dining out and or entertainment. However limited it was, we still sort of made the most of it when we were out at pubs, especially given Kobe in tow, and we ended up spending over this period $2,200 on dining out. So I suspect that's where most of the alcohol budget actually went. Accommodation, so caravan park fees and sort of general state park fees, ended up being about $1,600. Now, we hadn't expected to spend that much, though all told, when we were driving through the Territory and part of the Flinders, it's pretty difficult to park up in free camps in certain sections, so Yalara, Alice Springs, and then also when we were down in Adelaide getting the car modified, ended up taking the bulk of that cost overall. So it wasn't too bad. It's worth mentioning though that other than a few private land exceptions, we almost exclusively stayed at G'day parks. We hedged our bets with multiple caravan park memberships, but weirdly enough, Big Four doesn't seem to be that fond of dogs, especially as we get into Victoria. Now, there's one other line item here, miscellaneous / touristy things. So, diving with the sharks, cycling around Uluru, diving Kilsby sinkhole, and general supplies, shopping, goodies, birthday gifts. That came to nearly $4,500. YOLO? Other cost centres like phone, internet and insurance are all variable, and I opted not to include those figures because it really depends on what you're paying in terms of insurance premiums for your caravan and car. It's everybody's got a different experience, especially depending on what outfit they have. Starlink is something that we've opted for because, well, I need it for my job. But if you don't need internet all the time, you can get away without spending that money on keeping your phone and internet bills up to date. Finally, that brings us to the big one. Car and caravan maintenance, which has come to a grand total of $11,125. Yikes. So the more palatable components of that sum include $530 odd for the servicing of the Land Cruiser, which we've only had to do once, $275 for the replacement of the Caravan tyre that went flat when we were in the Flinders, and the $350 that we spent getting the 12-pin socket rewired within the Land Cruiser itself. Once we got the wiring diagram, of course, that is. We previously spoke about having a DC to DC charger in the Caravan itself, which meant that, in theory, whilst your car's running and driving, you're actually sending charge through the 12-pin or Anderson plug, depending on your setup, through to the batteries. So even if you're not getting any solar whatsoever, which we haven't been for most of the time since we passed south of Adelaide, you can actually get significant charge close enough to what you were getting on grid power. Funnily enough, we thought it wasn't going to work because technically the DC to DC charger isn't compatible with lithium, but it's sending power through and the batteries are still good. So great, and it's been a huge saving grace, especially since, well, other than right now, we haven't really had much by the way of sunshine. It's been very much cloudy and rainy, so we've been stuck inside here or driving around most of the time. Anyway, what we'd wished we'd known when we were shopping for Brutus, our 200 series, was the clusterfuck, pardon my French, that is GVM, GCM, ATM, B2C, TBM, WTF. Not to blow smoke up my own arse, but when we were researching the right tow vehicle to replace our Hilux, I produced numerous Excel spreadsheets comparing across vehicles, and not once was I really concerned when looking at the 200 series about towing a 3.5-ton Caravan. Ultimately, we were nearly half a ton over on the rear axle alone when we got weighed up in Alice Springs. That was a pretty nasty surprise. Also a major surprise was the Caravan. So we've shown you inside before, we packed reasonably well. I didn't think we overpacked what we needed, but I thought we brought enough that would make sense for living full time and still having some creature comforts. We ended up being 190 kilos over, which was interestingly enough equivalent to the water weight and what we were carrying, but that did include firewood, which we had underneath here, all of these jerry cans filled with fuel, and a few other things that we had that we saw as necessities, but ultimately, because we were overweight, had to ditch just to make sure that we were at least compliant on the Caravan front. We did our best to reduce our weight there, and I'm relatively confident that we've shifted enough out of here either to the op shops, the bins, or into the car itself. Some words of wisdom: just because there are cupboards, drawers, or other storage spots in your Caravan doesn't actually mean you can use them. I'd say we've used probably, what do you say, Mel, 75% of the available space to us in this van, and we're probably still just teetering on the edge of actually being at weight capacity. So we're still trying to find ways to either shift weight into the car, which can now handle it, or just out completely. Now, we could have, this is perhaps something that's worth noting, if you are still at that point of purchasing and going through your contract level and pre-delivery for your caravan. A lot of caravans are actually rated to a higher ATM. For example, the Nova, the chassis on this Terra Sports is rated to 3.7 tonne. However, in order for that to be done post-rego, we'd have to get the chains changed, we'd have to change the tow hitch from the 3.5 rated DO35 to the 4.5 tonne rated DO45. Now, that would be quite expensive. Well, I'd say expensive. It would probably have cost us about £2,000 just to get all of the engineering signed off, even though technically, aside from a few things, the chassis would be all right. But the other cost there would be on increasing the brake towing capacity, which we could have done in tandem with our GVM GCM upgrade, but at that point we were already faced with, as you can tell, significant bills and outlay just to get us compliant. We weren't really in the mood or thought to do anything further other than what was necessary to get us back on the road and compliant. I guess that's probably why in the end, if you're doing this long enough, and there's plenty of examples out there, you end up getting a 4.5 tonne rated caravan and a truck to boot. So what did we get done on the Land Cruiser? So the big thing is we got the Lovells 4200 kg GVM, which they equate to a 7700 GCM, basically adding the 3.5 tonne brake towing capacity to the increased GVM of the Land Cruiser 200 series. We also got put in the rear the airbag man airbags, which raise by another 50mm, which is why you can see this is actually, even though we're hooked up at the moment, we're still sort of riding a lot higher here. In actual fact, we were sort of about 500 kilos overweight on the rear axle now. I think we're now about 350 kilos under, just on the rear axle. Overall, I think we're under by about 600 kilos. So that's a huge change just to get the GVM GCM upgrade done. The airbags also help with the whole sagginess and profile, and generally speaking, we've found that that's actually made the ride smoother. Interestingly enough, what we didn't necessarily realize at the start was that we already had Black Hawk upper control arms. Now, if you go to Lovells, they'll often suggest that there's a few things that you get done in addition to the springs and suspension and all of that, which is the airbags, which we got done. Again, all of this done at TJM. We also already had the Black Hawk upper control arms. We didn't realize we'd need to get that engineered, so that also was another surprise cost at the end of it all. We also got the Mr. Hitch 4.5 tonne rated adjustable hitch. So what you can see here is that we've got two bolts here that we can actually remove and adjust the height. Now, what we learned with the travelling way from Cameron was that simply by being able to adjust your tow ball height, you can adjust the mass pretty significantly. And when you bear in mind that your tow ball mass is not actually applied as a 1-to-1 ratio as downward mass on your rear axle, it's actually 1.5 times what your tow ball mass is. It's pretty significant to see the adjustment as you lower and raise the hitch itself. So we've had a bit of a play around with it. We started at the lowest level, we've moved up one step. We've actually seen as a result there's a bit more weight coming down on the rear axle, just enough for it to travel a bit more evenly. In any case, when you get weighed, it's worth identifying where you want that hitch to be level. And certainly if, as in our case, the OEM hitch tongue wasn't the right height, I'd absolutely recommend it. This was only, I think, $400. It was definitely worth the money spent. And again, it's just peace of mind and weight. So, the grand total for all of that work came to $8,396. Not gonna lie, that hurt. All's well that ends well though. As I said, the car drives so much better. We've got no sag. We know for certain now that we are compliant and underweight across the board. We even have enough weight on spare weight on the rear axle of the Land Cruiser that we could, if space permits, install and fill a wine fridge. Although I'm pretty sure Mel would prefer that we added another fur child instead. Now, putting that all into perspective, that may seem like an insane sum. All told, with a few other miscellaneous line items, it came up to $30,000 that we've spent in 105 days. So just under $300 a day. Not great. It's definitely been a steep and expensive learning curve for us, and I think there's going to be a lot of frugal living and free camping ahead of us. But all that aside, we've had a compliant ton of fun, and we've met some amazing people along the way. And you know what, just getting it all out of the way, and now we can really enjoy the trip and not have to worry about it. It was worth actually facing the difficult challenge of getting us weighed and making sure that this was all kosher, so to speak. Hell, when we look at it, it would have cost us nearly as much to fly to Europe and back. And I tell you what, being able to see and do all that we've done over the last near enough 4 months, you can't really compare the two. Anyway, next week we'll be showing you how many different ways you can butter toast and how many times can you actually reuse the same tea bag. Cheers, travel safe. Kobe, come on, come on. Hey.